Well, now that time is catching up with the survivors, I feel more than ever the responsibility to remind the world about the German genocide against the Jews. Most people, when they think of the Holocaust, think of concentration camps. But few people know that we, Jews from Eastern Europe, have never been in concentration camp. We were not deported. Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, came to us. They rounded up and shot the Jewish population in shtetl after shtetl. More than 1.5 million Jews were murdered that way. So you see, each survivor has his own unique story to tell. Survivors were unable to talk about their experiences for many decades, and I was no exception. Finally, I became obsessive about having a personal record for my children and grandchildren, which evolved into the published memoir. It's a collage of prose, narrative poems, and photographs. For today, I selected a series of poems and arranged them chronologically to try to give you, as best as words can tell, some insight into that overwhelming event and its aftermath. I'd like to begin with my poem, Why I Write. I've been silent so long, now I'm obsessed. Language is wanting, but I must struggle to put it in words. I write to justify my existence. Summoned by the millions who died, I write to testify, to take the world and God to task for their silence. I write to search for answers, for release and for repair, lest my grief spill over. I was born in Lachva, a small shtetl in eastern Poland, when the Germans invaded our town in July of 1941. Lachva had a population of 6,000, including 2,000 Jews. The following poem is called German Invasion. Suddenly, there was the German invasion. Primitive fear mixed with rational thought. They are civilized people, our parents said. And though they tried to keep a calm exterior and even speak to us kids of cheerful things, we sensed that they were worried, and that made us afraid and filled our minds with dark imaginings. We gauged our circumstance by their expressions. When they smiled a little, for that moment we were not afraid. I felt secretly reassured when, level with my child's eyes, I saw the inscription on the soldiers' belt buckles, Gott mit uns, God's with us. But why the Hakenkreuz, the swastika? In place of God, they worshipped murder, obsessed with genocide, devouring in cold blood as many defenseless innocents as they could, calling themselves honorable German soldiers. Dear God, I expected better from you. Immediately, the Germans imposed a curfew and set up a Judenrat, a Jewish council through whom they proceeded to transmit their orders. On August 14th, 1941, their order called for all men 14 and over to report to be processed for work. They intended to kill them and bury them in prepared ditches, just as they did in all of the neighboring towns. The head of our Judenrat, Dov Lopatin, convinced the SS that it would be to their advantage to let the men live and use them as slave laborers. New decrees. Day after day, new decrees. Wear yellow stars, walk only in the gutter, surrender all gold, then silver, furs and woolens, down to our linens. Now their order called for all men, 14 and over, to report at dawn on the edge of town to be processed for work. Rifle butts pounded on every door, heraus and schnell, screaming for our boys and men. The town half-wit among them, bewildered, led away by armed guards in spotless uniforms and shiny black leather boots. Doflopatin, head of our Judenrat, spurned their offer to be spared. At SS headquarters he pled, "Let all men live and continue as slave laborers." The Nazis saw merit in his urging and granted a reprieve. "It fell to me," my father said, "to shine horses' hides, when a good German whispered quietly, wenn ich ein Jude wär, würde ich Selbstmord begehen. If I were a Jew, I'd kill myself." That was a good German. The soldiers now called each man in turn, submerged his head in a barrel of water, while they grew wild with laughter. At night, with the kitchen door slightly ajar, I saw father's back, a work of welts, and mother washing his wounds. Now grandfather's tears. The Germans issued their edict to surrender our worldly belongings. They took hostages, our parents among them. Grandfather came to comfort us. "Keep your faith and trust in God," he said. And we intoned a prayer of pleading to bring our parents safely back. Then Grandpa raised his fragile hands as if to place on us a blessing, to bid us life itself, perhaps, and we saw tears in Grandpa's eyes. The ghetto and destruction lay ahead. My father, my little sister, and I survived. Grandfather perished with all the rest. Grandpa died secure in his faith. We go on in grief, questioning God's ways. Soon we lost our home to Grechko, a local peasant whom the Germans appointed mayor. Grechko is the name of my poem. Muttering my prayers, riveted by that tightly shuttered window, peering through the gaps between slots, I was on constant guard. One day I spotted Grechko's massive frame and overfed face advancing up our street with his horde. As newly appointed burgomaster, the Nazis gave him choice of any Jewish home. He selected ours. "This suits me fine," he said. "Get out at once." Bearing his gold tooth. "This suits me fine," he said. "Get out at once," baring his gold tooth as he grinned. We took the few possessions allowed, and I carried my favorite coat. After a final look around the house they had built, my parents carefully closed the door behind them, and we went. We moved in with relatives, the Bookchins, Rini, you'll know, into their tiny house, which later fell within the perimeter of the ghetto. The formation of the ghetto coincided with the first night of Passover, April 1st, 1942. All 2,000 of us were herded into some 40 tiny shtetl houses, 2 to 3 families in a room, surrounded by barbed wire with only one gate, locked and guarded at all times. We suffered from starvation, disease, and forced labor. No one escaped. In the ghetto, after morning roll call, able men and women, slaves in ragged clothes, hanging on emaciated bones, were led off 4 abreast to drain swamps and build roads under the scrutiny of merciless SS and local guards. At dusk, a column of ghosts struggling to keep in step to ward off rifle butt blows came shuffling back. Heads were counted once again with their usual admonition, "You will all be killed if even one of you is missing." Each felt responsible for the other's fate. The numbers always checked. No one escaped. And now the ghetto from a child's perspective, children in the ghetto. Hemmed in, alone in the ghetto, we children would unravel old sweaters, re-knit them in a looser stitch to save some wool for socks, a hat, or maybe mittens in time for winter. Or we'd lie by the high barbed wire fence in wait to see a bird or catch the buzz of a bee, mumbling, "Nothing's like it used to be." So we talk to the sky above where God himself resides. We want to be somewhere else, anywhere that isn't here. There must be so much somewhere in the world. By the time winter arrived, our town was Judenfrei, free of Jews. From the first day in the ghetto, our boys secretly began to prepare for an uprising, should the end come. Unable to procure weapons, they accumulated some axes, iron bars, and naphtha to torch the ghetto houses. When on September 3rd, 1942, the Einsatzgruppen arrived in Lachva, we knew that our time was up. Together with their local collaborators, they surrounded the ghetto. Armed Germans ordered us out to the street and to line up 4 abreast to be marched to the prepared ditches to be killed and buried there. The house where the Judenrat functioned burst into flames, a signal by the head of the Judenrat to begin the uprising. Immediately there were houses on fire all around the ghetto. Flames and smoke filled the narrow ghetto street. The Germans panicked and began to shoot at random into the hysterical mob as families, crying out loud in prayer, struggled to stay together. Our fighters threw themselves at the Nazis. Some wrestled their rifles from them and began to shoot back. The organizer of the uprising, Yitzhak Rochchin, with a single blow of his axe, split the head of a Nazi in front of my very eyes. People were falling as they were shot. In our family, 28 people were lost that morning, including my mother, age 36, and my sister, 16. Ghetto uprising. That last September morning, without a miracle from above, From his invisible being or from the world below, abandoned, we were doomed. Our ghetto was to be consumed. The sun rose blood red that morning, ever faithful to its course. Shamefully it kept on shining while death was waiting at our doors, that day of judgment, our fateful moment. Jews and uprising staging, Germans caught by surprise, ghetto houses blazing, 8 Nazis axed, barbed wire stormed, few of us escaped. All visions were ending, gone was all hope, cruelty was raging in unimaginable scope. Goodbye, childhood dreams and times yet to be. The chaos that morning, the murder of my kin, their piercing screams recurring in my brain. Time is powerless to heal my pain. All who could ran. I was swept along by the mob behind me, and I was literally thrust out over the fallen ghetto gate. And I too got on my own 2 feet and started running under the bullets, jumping over bodies until I reached the edge of the forest. Terrified, I sat down on a tree stump to wait. To wait for what? I didn't know. Some men passed, but they were not about to pick me up when they just lost their own families. Then I again heard a rush in the bushes, and I was sure that it was Germans looking for the escapees. Instead, I saw a boy from Lachva, Nyoma, holding my little sister's hand, and with my father on the other side of her. You see, people ran from the ghetto in various directions. Miraculously, my father took the same route that I did, and we met. He never let go of my little sister's hand because children were trampled underfoot. She was 8 years old, and I was 12. This is called No Shoes. Beneath a hail of bullets, made it to the edge of town where harvests, newly gathered, left fields of coarsest stubble. Just steps, and our bare feet were bloody. Knife-like the stubble attacked. Shoes came off somewhere while running. Tearing his shirt into pieces, father tied our delicate feet. The rags soon were shredded and bloodied and gone the way of the shoes. Cast upon fields of stubble, forsaken by God and by man, friends and family murdered. Why so frantic to go on? We wanted so desperately to live. Barefoot and hungry, we begged for food, drank stagnant water, thick with growth, from my father's shoes. His lace-up shoes stayed on. By the way, I learned after 9/11 that in extreme fear, people experience an adrenaline rush, causing their feet to shrink and to lose their shoes. In retrospect, I understood what happened. By the nightfall of the next day, we walked barefoot through the woods. But by nightfall on the next day, we reached the Pripyat marshes. And that is the name of my next poem. At night, in the Pripyat marshes, concealed under a haystack, our fishermen and Yankel Mester, the timber merchant, came upon us. Too fearful to sleep, I heard their muted voices urge father, leave your kids and steal away with us for a chance to live, to survive. They knew these wetlands best. One barged tree trunks down its networks of winding rivers and canals. The other cast his nets into the Pripyat River. I strained my racing mind to listen till I heard my father's never. Roaming the desolate Pripyat marshes, the fishermen and the timbermen were caught by local collaborators and shot on the spot. Germans with their local guides came into the swamps to hunt for Jews. Out of the 2,000 of us, about 90 escaped from the ghetto, and half were caught and shot. For my next poem, it helps to know that logging was a major industry in our area. Huge tree trunks were floated down the waterways to their destinations, clogging the rivers. The poem is called Hunted. Hunted, we had to cross the river that very night. Under darkness of a vacant sky, from the top of trackless cliffs, down we groped over rugged thickets and jagged rocks to the water's edge. The river, stagnant with waterlogged tree trunks, spanned as wide as eyes could see. Children first was heard, one at a time. Naked little nimble feet staggered from trunk to trunk, terrified of losing balance. The waterlogged tree trunks sank and rose with every step. Ripples upon ripples broke the still surface, swept and swayed and bore ever onward, then washed against the shore and ceased. We made it across. The river was again asleep. And we walked eastward for weeks on end, barefoot as we began, begging for food, slept in wooded areas, skirting villages and farms so as not to be caught, trying to get over to the Russian side. Once we had to cross a road that was guarded by German motorcycles. The poem is called Fireflies. We came to a sudden stop, waiting to sneak across the heavily guarded road. Fear-stricken and trembling, somehow I became aware of fireflies glowing around me. They're not afraid to flicker in the dark and give themselves away, I nudged my little sister next to me. We wanted to hide, become invisible, change our color to green, and remain in the forest undetectable. But the Germans advanced so rapidly into Russia that we gave up our attempt to reach the border, the front, the Russian front, and decided to remain in the forest at the side of the Russian partisans. Life was cheap then, but the life of a Jew had no value at all. Though they were themselves on the run, driven by anti-Semitism and free from fear of punishment, partisans too killed many Jews. Remember Nyoma, the guy who held my sister's hand? Here is a story by his name, his story. Having escaped in the death in the ghetto, Nyoma fled into the woods. Not yet 20, burning with vengeance, he joined the partisans. Unarmed, he went with them to carry out raids, and when he returned, rifle in hand, he was accepted into their ranks. One night by the fire, deep within the Russian forest, far behind the German front, lucky men who had their glasses tried each other's spectacles. Some were actually swapped, hands were clasped, and deals were struck. The commander too participated, though he hadn't worn them before. With Nyoma's glasses, his vision cleared. Soon, rumors maligning Nyoma began to be heard. The Jew was dozing on guard. Pretending righteous indignation, the commander assembled his men to witness a malingerer's punishment. An unsuspecting Nyoma was ordered to walk ahead, and then the commander shot him in the back. Everyone knew what had truly happened, though no one dared utter a sound. The commander coveted Nyoma's glasses, and now he had them for his own. Defying the odds. We could have died of terror, of grief, or hunger, or typhus fever from lice and filth. We could have been poisoned by stagnant water we scooped up and drank from father's shoes, or mushrooms resembling the edible variety. We could have died from exposure to the full force of the long Russian winter, or wolves eager for prey. We could have been betrayed to the Germans by some trusted local informer. We didn't die. We endured, drank water from a hole in the ground, ate saltless stolen potatoes, while concocting fantasies about recipes. We dreamed of sitting down to a meal, of taking off our clothes, of warm water and cleanliness. At night, under cover of darkness, behind walls of green and towering canopies of trees, we often chanted prayers and sang songs ending with our favorite, Soll schon kommen die Geula, let the redemption come soon, urging God to see to it, lest the Messiah come a little bit too late. We hid in the forest for 2 years, in woods that were impenetrable, so dense. Winter 1942. After escaping death in the ghetto, the forest concealed us unconditionally, offering refuge and its bounty with unlimited kindness. Though captive, we were also free. Then winter gripped the forest. Life was put on hold. We huddled amid evergreens, naked trees with sparkling limbs, layers upon layers of purest snow, driving wind and numbing cold. At dusk, the vast primordial forest lapsed into solemn stillness, broken only by distant howling wolves. But the unappeasable, murderous Germans came on skis to cleanse the woods. We abandoned our tiny hut with glowing embers for the deeper wilderness and felt safer after freshly falling snow obliterated our tracks. Ears were poised to identify every sound, from falling trees to snapping twigs. And day by day we kept from starving with scraps of food we had begged and saved and prayed they should outlast the Nazi sweep. When we were liberated by the Russians in 1944, we went back home to Lachva to look for other survivors. There were none whom we didn't already know about. Final solution. There are no Jews in Lachva anymore, or in Lenin, Luninets, and Kozhangaradok. No chanting in wooden synagogues, no Sabbath candles in windows, no next year in Jerusalem hopes. There are no cobblers or tailors hard at work, no water carrier, midwife, or matchmaker, no rabbi, poet, or homespun philosopher. In each shtetl without its Jews, there hovers roaring silence, testifying to the truth. Subsequently, we ended up in a displaced persons camp in Germany, in West Germany. Camp Föhrenwald. There were many. In 1945. And that's the name of my poem. The Polish landscape with its villages vanishes into the past even as we look. We hoist our bundles onto the deck of a flat car of an endless moving freight, hurl ourselves onto the platform. Trains did not stop at the stations, they just kept going. Hanging on for dear life as the train gained speed. Houses drifted by with lighted windows. Smoke rises from chimneys. We can't imagine the lives of the people inside. Only our existence seems real. It is important to leave Poland with all possible haste before the communists establish control and close every route of escape. Carrying the Poland of our childhood inside of us, we arrive in the American zone in West Germany, where we exchange our status of Polish citizens for that of displaced persons. From the displaced persons camp, we came to the United States in 1946. That was from 41 to 46. I haven't been to school until we came to the United States. Here we found some family photographs. We had nothing from home. My poem is called Faded Photographs. I long sought and found some family photographs from home, sent to the United States, Canada, and Palestine, inscribed and dated in the 30s. One is in my mother's elegant handwriting. Their images are carefully placed in an album with silken cover, each labeled, lest they go unnamed when it's time to pass on the task of remembering. The blurred, beloved faces on my aging photographs validate who I was and who I am still. They give stability to my life, interrupted by war and Nazis and divided between two worlds. The last to have known them, to have witnessed liquidation, the brutal murder of my people, mother and sister, grandparents to infant cousins, kinfolk, all of them lost to the Germans. My children, too, are defined by my losses. We look at the pictures together. I explain who is who. Your grandma killed at 36, your aunt at 16, in the hope that they will remember and pass on our story to those who come after. Next, I would like to share with you a couple of poems for a glimpse into the mind of a survivor. The first is Confronting God, a monologue. The world was a raging hell, facing annihilation. We implored you to intervene. You kept silent. Your people, the Orthodox elders who lived most righteously and kept your every commandment, in their unwavering faith, opposed violent resistance. They went to their deaths unvalued, unnoticed, believing it was you who summoned them. Our young people, against hopeless odds, staged a bloody uprising, created my chance to flee. But if I was kept alive by your design, does the miracle of my survival compensate for the thousands killed? Where were you when gold teeth were ripped from jaws, when women and children were shot and buried half alive? You kept silent. I've been afraid to speak harshly to you, and even now I hesitate to pour out my rage. It shouldn't surprise you, though, that I, the witness, cannot reconcile your existence with the slaughter of innocents. Can one go through hell and continue to trust in your goodness? And yet, I want to come to terms with you, experience you as present. But for the record, there will always be in the convex mirror of the Shoah the likeness of me, eyes bursting toward heaven, mouth pried open by a scream. And my questions persist. The world stood silent. How could it be possible that the earth continued to spin, that somewhere there were weddings and births, baptisms and bar mitzvahs, feasts to celebrate and photographs to savor happy memories, even as the Nazis decreed our fate? And how could it be possible that so much inhumanity and barbarism be concentrated in one group of people and their collaborators who beat and torture to death with personal brutality and sadism? That the world stood silent, that suffering and death continued uninterrupted. That already there are those evading and denying facts my own eyes witnessed. How could it be possible? My next poem is untitled. Some say, put it behind you. What a soulless concept to put it behind. Decades after the event, something in me cries out. It's the presence of the absence of family and friend. Loss has given my life its shape, all that I have and haven't become, to that cruelest time I can trace. Aftermath. 60 years after the fact, painful memories intact, nightmares recurring, Nazis appearing. Must survivors remain at their altar of pain, forever enduring unspeakable haunting? And will it subside on life's other side, or go on persisting into the realm of night? Sometimes afraid that even after death, they'll find me. And finally, I'd like to share with you my red dress. I always wanted to don shocking red, but ended up wearing black and gray instead. I wanted to have a sense of belonging, but felt disconnected at every crossing. I never have heard the music of life without remembering its darkest side. But very recently, I half realized my quest. Though I haven't yet worn it, I bought a red dress. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for arranging this evening. I often give presentations, but never as important a one as tonight. Thank you very much.